In this video, we'll take a look at splitting your keyguard so that you can print it on a printer that may not have a build surface large enough to print the keyguard in total. So by default, keyguards are split using a straight line that creates two flat surfaces. If I choose to look at the first half of this keyguard, you see that this line is just a straight line going right down through the center of the grid. But I can alternatively split it using dovetails. And I can adjust the size of the dovetail, and we'll take a look and see what effect that has. But the first thing to notice is that dovetails are kind of blind to things like bars, message bars, command bars, and how the dovetails will fall out right along the edge or end of a bar is kind of unpredictable. You can, however, make some changes here that will account for problems like this. If you tried to print this right now, this little piece here may not even be attached to the largest piece, but certainly it would be a question how strong this would be and how easily it would break off. And you should look at both the first and second half of the keyguard whenever you're looking for artifacts like this. So when we look at the second half of the keyguard, things look pretty sturdy. But we'll go back there as we make changes. So the first thing we need to do is deal with this little piece of plastic. And if I go back and look at the app layout, what I'll notice is that I didn't account for a status bar at all. What would happen if I accounted for a status bar, saying that, oh, actually the status bar is 2 millimeters thick, 2 millimeters high. So that will affect how the dovetails appear right around the edge of the bar. Again, we need to make sure we're looking at the other half of the keyguard as well. And in this example, well, then that created two little nibs on the second half of the keyguard. So what may address an issue on one side may not address it on the other. So we'll just take this back to its zero height, which is how we measured it the first time. And let's look at some alternative ways to deal with this. First way is just to modify the size of the dovetails. So if I increase this to 5 millimeters, then this one's more solid, but I produce a little artifact there. Let's take it up again to a 6 millimeter one. I'm still back with that artifact, a 7 millimeter one. And now suddenly things look very clean. But first we need to check the other half of the keyguard, and that also looks very clean. So a 7 millimeter or approximately 7 millimeter dovetail addresses little artifacts that we otherwise would have had to deal with somehow. And the other thing to note is how tightly the two sets of dovetails will fit into one another. And I can adjust that by adjusting this slider down here called Add Dovetail Gap. Right now there's about a 1/10 of a millimeter gap around the edge of the dovetail, but I can increase that even more, and you'll see these dovetails shrink in size to up to almost 1/2 millimeter. The other side of the keyguard, these openings haven't changed size at all. So it's only on the first half of the keyguard that the dovetails shrink a bit. And we'll we'll see what the impact of that is in a moment on a live keyguard. Here are two halves of a keyguard. In this instance, they were printed with a dovetail gap of 0.2 millimeters. And when I bring them together, they slide together fairly easily. Maybe too easily, because that means they also come apart pretty easily. This is the second print, and it was printed with a 1/10 of a millimeter gap. And this time, you have to press them together a little harder, but it stays better as well. And I'll tell you that it's almost impossible to pull these apart. The one place that's still going to be a little bit loose is right up here where there's no real complete dovetail. And so that part you'll definitely have to glue, and it wouldn't hurt to glue the whole thing. But with a nice tight fit, not so tight that they won't go together at all, but with a nice tight fit, you might actually be able to get away with not gluing anything. In this example, it's hard to see, but this is a very thin rail by comparison to this keyguard. And it's still possible to use dovetails here. They create a kind of bumpy center rail. And because the pieces were so narrow, I used a 4 millimeter dovetail on this. This one is using a 7 or 8 millimeter dovetail. The smaller the dovetail, the tighter the fit will be, and the better, more strong the connection will be. On the other hand, it also will be a little bit tougher to assemble, and you might actually have to get a little help from a friend to kind of knock it together a bit. But that's just to show you that it can be done on a rail that is fairly narrow, one that comes to a point.